Have you told your friends about crypto, only for them to blurt back that it's something used by tax dodgers and criminals? Now that sort of response infuriates me no end. This is because it completely ignores the fact that the traditional financial system is one of the most corrupt there is. And perhaps one of the most egregious examples of this was all the criminality, skullduggery, and tax evasion exposed by the Panama Papers. So, in this video, I'm going to lift the veil and remind you all about how crooked traditional finance really is. All that is to help you slam your smart aleck mates back in their box and convince them that they should ditch that dirty fiat and get on board the crypto train instead. Oi, Mike, what was that other thing I had to say before I get going?
Stop being a numpty, mate. It's the same bloody thing you say in every video. You're not a financial advisor, and everything that comes out of that fat mouth of yours is for educational and entertainment purposes only.
Well, that's not very nice of him, but he is right about my not being a financial advisor, not the fat mouth thing. So, with that bit of verbal abuse out of the way, I want to give a warm welcome to anyone stumbling across my channel for the first time. Greetings and welcome to the Bureau. This channel is home to the best crypto reviews, news and analysis to hit the blockchain. So if any of that sounds like something you could be interested in, then be sure to smash up that subscribe button. Level up that dedication to crypto by pinging that notification bell too. Do that and you'll be notified whenever this crypto champ uploads another video. Finally, those Panama Paper legal chaps appear to be charging quite a lot for their time. You good people aren't crooks, so I'd rate your time as being way more valuable. That's why I've placed some handy timestamps below. Use them to skip ahead to the sections of this video that interest you the most. Okay, we all set? Let's start peeling back those layers. To kick things off, I should probably tell you what the Panama Papers are. Put simply, it was the largest data leak in history, and all that happened back in 2016. 11.5 million files were leaked from the database of the fourth largest offshore law firm in the world. Yep, that would be Mossack Fonseca. That leak can also be expressed as 2.6 terabytes of data. To place that into context, consider that the Paradise Papers were 1.4 terabytes of data, the 2013 offshore leaks were 250 gigabytes, and the 2014 Luxembourg leaks were just 4 gigabytes. Then you have the Swiss leaks, also known as the HSBC files in 2015, weighing in at 3.3 gigabytes, and WikiLeaks in 2010 at just 1.7 gigabytes of data. So, the Panama Papers included over 1,000 times more data than WikiLeaks. Quite the data dump if you ask me. But why are the Panama Papers such a big deal? Well, they showed the scale and the ways in which the ultra-rich and powerful can use the traditional financial system to exploit secretive tax regimes. They can use offshore bank accounts to avoid taxes and hide their wealth. Taxes are just for the little guys like you and me, am I right? Incriminated were 12 national leaders among 143 politicians, their families and close associates. On top of that, you had sports stars and film icons too. So, surprise, surprise, if you're rich and powerful, then there are some secret ways not to pay tax like everyone else. What was staggering was that the data dates back to the 1970s. Just goes to show that these types of shenanigans have been going on for quite a while. Now, with all that being said, the majority of the documents were from the 1990s to 2008, when the global financial crisis hit and spawned the creation of Bitcoin. So, which high-profile national leaders were on the naughty list? Well, that would be the likes of Nawaz Sharif, Pakistan's Prime Minister, Ayad Alawi, ex-interim Prime Minister and former Vice President of Iraq, Petro Poroshenko, President of Ukraine, Allah Mubarak, son of Egypt's former president, and the Prime Minister of Iceland. I wanted to leave this last guy out as he's a bit of an embarrassment to my country. But it turns out that the father of former British Prime Minister David Cameron also ran an offshore investment fund. This allowed him to avoid paying British tax by paying a load of Bahamas residents to sign the paperwork. Classic Davey C, getting your dad to do your dirty work. Other names implicated in the Panama Papers include movie legend and kung fu master Jackie Chan. Topping the list for sports stars, you had the best football player in the world, Lionel Messi. Yep, the real football, that is. Good old Lionel was even sentenced to 21 months in prison due to the revelations in the Panama Papers. He was later arrested and convicted of 3 counts of tax fraud, fined €2 million and given that prison sentence. But don't you worry, Messi was kind of lucky that non-violent offenders in Spain with sentences of less than 2 years are rarely imprisoned. So yeah, that legendary footballer never saw the inside of a prison cell. It also meant he was free to go out and collect that sweet sponsorship money from the now-defunct crypto project Syrian Labs. Oh yes, over $2 billion in transactions were also connected to close associates of Vladimir Putin. Now, my lawyer has told me to say that this close association is probably a coincidence. However, it's interesting nonetheless. So, what the Panama Papers did was expose the levels of corruption in the global financial system. But that begs the question, why should you care? Well, before the Panama Papers were leaked, every year about $70 billion that the US could have been using for things like education, infrastructure, healthcare, that sort of stuff, was being siphoned off. It was being hidden in shell companies and anonymous offshore entities based in places like the British Virgin Islands. But if you're a bit of a libertarian like me, you might not be that concerned with the government losing out on some of that sweet, sweet tax revenue. However, there are numerous examples that came out of the Panama Papers which highlight how rotten that traditional financial system is. Here's just one of them. The documents showed a link to Rami Makhlouf, a cousin of Assad, the Grand Overlord of Syria. This chap was described in US diplomatic cables as the nation's poster boy for corruption. Makhlouf ended up having sanctions imposed on him in 2008 for benefiting from and aiding public corruption of Syrian regime officials, and his brother Hafiz was blacklisted in 2007. But that was no problem to Mossack Fonseca, who continued to work with these two rogues. They even rejected the advice of their own compliance team to cut ties with the brothers in 2011. I guess these Makhlouf chaps were paying them a pretty penny. But wait, that's not all. The documents also reveal that HSBC lobbied on Mr. Makhlouf's behalf to keep his Swiss bank accounts open when the bombs were flying in the Syrian civil war. The leak also showed how Mossack Fonseca, HSBC and British officials assisted Makhlouf before the Syrian war. Those guys at HSBC didn't seem to think anything was wrong. Prime example. Here is an email from Mossack Fonseca which stated that, quote, Mr. X told me that HSBC compliance department of the bank not only in Geneva but also in their headquarters in London know about Mr. Makhlouf and that they are comfortable with him. Those chaps at Mossack Fonseca also tipped off HSBC saying, quote, please kindly take note that your company, Drex Technologies, is going to be checked by the Financial Investigation Agency. HSBC then duly tipped off their client, which is actually a criminal offence under the British Virgin Islands Proceeds of Criminal Conduct Act. In March 2011, Syrian security forces started gunning down pro-democracy freedom fighters in Damascus. Hafiz Makhlouf was widely reported to have played a key role in that. However, that didn't seem to be a problem for either HSBC or Mossack Fonseca, who both continued to take that blood money and work for this shady guy. Days later, certificates for Drex were sent to the British Foreign Office with Rami Makhlouf as the beneficial owner, director and shareholder. Those chaps at HSBC had got those documents couriered to the UK to be certified by a British official in a process known as apostillate. Apparently, the British Foreign Secretary William Hague knew nothing of this, but that's not a good look at all. Essentially what happened here is that those fine folks over at HSBC, Mossack Fonseca and the British Foreign Office were happy to help with financing the crushing of pro-democracy protests via the use of shell companies. Egregious, if you ask me. The question is, why didn't the likes of HSBC or Mossack Fonseca cut ties faster? Well, it appears if you have the money, then anything goes in this financial system. It also goes to show how shell companies like Drex Technologies can be used to hide money by some pretty unsavoury people. And while we're on the topic of HSBC, may I remind you that these are the same folks who were fined almost $2 billion for helping to clean cartel cash. The same bank that processed millions of dollars for a large investment Ponzi scheme. And may I also remind you, the same bank that has recently blocked crypto deposits from retail customers like you and me. Talk about priorities. But I digress. Back to the shell companies. So, what exactly are these? Well, you could go to places like Panama or the British Virgin Islands and enjoy laws where they would not reveal who the beneficial owner of that company is. That's obfuscated by laying on different things to protect the anonymity of that puppeteer behind the scenes. For example, you might have fake directors that you pay and someone else becomes the frontman of the company. These are called nominee directors. Oh, and some jurisdictions actually allow for nominee shareholders. So that basically means that there could be no trace at all as to who is really behind the company in question. Now, having said this, it's important to note that just because you might have a shell company, it doesn't necessarily mean you're doing anything illegal. You might be doing some business activities that you don't want other business partners or competitors to know about. Then you have the more regular type of tax avoidance, like inheritance or estate planning or protecting assets against currency restrictions. But it so happens that many banks, criminals, investment advisors, politicians, and billionaires use these shell companies to hide their wealth, avoid taxes, or get involved in some straight-up money laundering. So, what really happened with those Panama Papers? Well, it was really the true scale of it all. So, let's take a look into that. Back in 2015, those Panama Papers were obtained by an anonymous source, a bit like Satoshi in a way. The twist is that you can almost bet your bottom dollar that the source would have had their life endangered if they'd stood up tall and revealed their identity. After all, they'd exposed some of the richest and most powerful people on the planet. Fun fact, 29 of the people included in the Forbes Rich list made an appearance in the Panama Papers. Anyhow, this anonymous source passed them on to the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung, which then proceeded to share them with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Those guys then passed them on to their large network of international partners, like the BBC over here in the UK, to run their own investigations. The incredible thing is that the investigation involved over 400 journalists, and none of them reported any findings until the agreed-upon date of April 3rd, 2016. So, after a year of digging through all of these papers, they released their findings to the world all at the same time. Now, I always thought journalism was dog-eat-dog, but it didn't seem to be the case here. Another interesting thing is that the whistleblower didn't ask for money. They claimed that all they wanted was for these corrupt activities to be exposed. Quite a heroic act, if you ask me. Now, let's move on to the scale of these dodgy financial practices. Well, the data included encrypted documents from Mossack Fonseca, which set up over 214,000 shell companies or offshore entities, with the firm handling around $2 trillion in transactions for their clients. Those clients were from more than 100 countries, with most of the corporate clients coming from countries like Hong Kong, Switzerland, the UK, Panama, and Cyprus. They worked with more than 14,000 banks, law firms, and incorporators to set up companies and trusts for their clients. About half of these shell companies were set up in the British Virgin Islands. That's around 107,000 companies set up in the British Virgin Islands. Now, to place that into context, the island nation only has a population of around 30,000. Even though the impact of the data leak was embarrassing, the truth is that this didn't really have a meaningful impact on many of the people exposed. China is one country that welcomed the leaks as they were already in the midst of an anti-corruption campaign. They used this leak to expose bad actors in the Communist Party. The Chinese leadership ended up selectively using some documents to expose political opponents and censored some to protect political allies. Never let a good crisis go to waste, huh? Iceland's Prime Minister, Sigmundur Davíð Gunnlaugsson, I hope I got that name right, ended up resigning after the data leak, and for good reason. It was revealed that Gunnlaugsson had stashed large amounts of money in the British Virgin Islands in a company owned by him and his girlfriend, who he ended up marrying. After those wedding bells had chimed, then he sold his share in that company to his wife for $1. And hey presto, he avoided all those financial reforms stemming from the financial crisis in Iceland. Here's another fun fact. There really weren't that many Americans on the tax dodger list leaked by those Panama Papers. About 3,100 shell companies were based in the US. Now, that may sound like a big number. However, in terms of the true number of tax dodgers in the US, that pales in comparison. So, why the low figures for Americans? Well, at the time of the leak, the US hadn't joined the OECD Common Reporting Standard, and that meant there were a whole lot easier tax dodging options closer to home. For those that don't know, the OECD stands for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's an intergovernmental economic organization with 37 member countries. One idea that this organization had was to share tax data to try and stop tax evasion. Now, the US did eventually end up joining the OECD Common Reporting Standard. The main takeaway from the Panama Papers wasn't necessarily the individual scandals or corrupt deals, but the fact that they placed the focus on the financial system itself. Now, there have always been theories, allegations, and rumors of hidden wealth. However, there was never any real evidence before the Panama Papers. Now, remember that Mossack Fonseca was the world's fourth largest offshore law firm, so just imagine how much more hidden wealth there is out there. According to some estimates, 8% of the world's wealth is hidden in tax havens. That's about $30 trillion. Some governments have long argued for tax reforms that will enable governments to capture the concealed wealth and boost their economies. I wonder if this is linked to the seeming ever-increasing proliferation of CBDCs. Now, what happened to Mossack Fonseca? Well, they shut their doors in March 2018. Naturally, that was due to blowback from the Panama Papers. Now you know that about $30 trillion were laundered by a number of helpful offshore law firms like Mossack Fonseca. So, that's the traditional financial system for you. So how much money laundering or dodgy transactions are happening in crypto? According to Chainalysis, just over 1% of all crypto transaction volume is illicit. That's about $11 billion in questionable transactions. Put another way, for every $1 in dodgy crypto transactions, there are about $273 in shady transactions being made by offshore law firms. So yes, you can already see that the amount of money laundering happening in crypto is way less than that happening in the traditional fiat system. However, things get even worse for traditional finance when you consider how those shady crypto transactions are broken down. Essentially, the vast majority of them are due to scams like those fake free Ethereum giveaways that follow you around YouTube. Honestly, that is one of the key reasons why I don't run ads on the channel. Also, ads are damn annoying. The point is that the vast amount of suspicious transactions in crypto are not being done for things like terrorist financing, squashing democratic protests, or avoiding sanctions. Instead, the majority of that $11 billion worth of nefarious transactions are just scammers wanting to get a quick bug, like those you will see impersonating me in the comments. But it is true that even scammers want to take those ill-gotten gains to the bank. About $2.8 billion was laundered through crypto exchanges, and dodgy over-the-counter or OTC brokers have been said to have facilitated about $3 billion in laundered transactions per year. So, money laundering is going on in crypto. However, it's a mere fraction of what's going on in the traditional financial system through the likes of offshore law firms like Mossack Fonseca. Even worse for fiat is that offshoring is just a fraction of the illicit transactions happening in the world. We've not even discussed the black market economies in numerous countries. So you should now have a pretty good idea about the true scale of dodgy shit happening in fiat land. The real elephant in the room compared to crypto's mouse. However, as the famous stereotype goes, elephants are afraid of mice. Alright team, that's about all I have time for today. But I do wish to share a few closing thoughts. Yes, the Panama Papers happened a while ago. However, they did shine a light on the shadowy and secretive industry of offshore companies used by the world's rich and powerful to hide assets and get around the rules by using far-flung jurisdictions. Some of those companies were used to do all manner of terrible things like bribery, arms deals, drug trafficking, fraud, and more. What shocks me to the core is thinking about how, behind those email chains and documents, there were unseen victims of the wrongdoing facilitated by this shadowy industry. I mean, within those document leaks, you have secret offshore deals that deprived some of the poorest countries in the world of billions of dollars worth of natural resources and facilitated things like human trafficking. Yes, crypto isn't perfect, and it is true that bad people use it for nefarious means. However, with what was exposed by the Panama Papers, is it really fair that crypto has such a bad reputation? Then I think about the scale of unethical or outright illegal practices of the banks and wonder why they are allowed to even keep on operating. Even worse, you have national leaders in democracies using these offshore companies to fill their pockets and hide their ill-gotten gains. Why is it that so many people seem to have forgotten about all this and are perfectly happy to brand crypto as a tool for criminals and crooks? It really doesn't make any sense to me. Even worse, that trend of the gap between rich and poor seems to be widening still. Now, I'm no socialist or communist. However, what the Panama Papers really showed me was how the deck in the traditional financial system is stacked against the little guys like us. Tax is for the many and apparently optional for the few. Personally, I don't want to play in that crooked sandbox, and I would much rather be all in on crypto. And I want to leave you with one single question. Do you really think that these shady practices have stopped? That's something for all those stacking fiat to think about. And that's it, folks. My overview of the Panama Papers and my reminder on how messed up that traditional financial system really is. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts, though. Do you think that shell companies are fair game? Would you use one if you were rich and powerful? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're thinking about that interesting thought to share, I recommend you check out my deals page. There, you'll find the hottest deals in crypto for things like exchanges, trading bots, crypto cards, hardware wallets, and more. However, if that traditional fiat system works for you, then you'll want to ignore that and see what that friendly bank or offshore law firm can do for you instead. And finally, if you enjoyed this video, then help this crypto gent out on his quest to become the biggest crypto YouTuber. You can tip your top hat in approval by smashing that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe or you'll be hearing from my offshore lawyers. Oh, you guys still here? Well then, I may as well let you in on a little secret. What I covered in that video was only the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole lot more included in my weekly email newsletter. It's basically a compilation of all the interesting content that may have flown under your radar. News, reviews, analysis, as well as a breakdown of my personal portfolio. Want to join? Well, don't delay. Just scoot on over to the description where you'll find a link to my sign-up form. There, you can enter your email address. Hit submit, confirm your email, and hey presto, you are a Coin Bureau insider. My next newsletter is being worked on as we speak, one you won't want to miss. See you next time, folks.